The approach that we're trying to adhere to is what we were taught by our teachers, and by us, I'm talking about the people that have been teaching in these programs. Among them are people like Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi, Shaykh Jamal al-Dhahabi, Abdul Hakim Winter, Imam Zayd, myself, and several other people. And we basically were taught by our teachers that it was binding upon the Muslims to follow one of the four rightly guided schools. And the reason for that is because the Ummah basically began its historical experience during the time of revelation, and during that time they had an absolute source and recourse to what was right. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he gave his rulings, there was no difference of opinion, because difference of opinion was just not within the realm of the Sahaba, in that the Prophet ﷺ was considered to be the absolute end-all of authority, because he was speaking as a representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And however, during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he did allow for difference of opinion amongst his Sahaba, and he did not find fault in them. And the one that's most often used as an example in the Usuli books is the hadith which is in Sahih al-Bukhari, when they were on their way to Bani Qurayza, and the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يصلين أحدكم العصر إلا عند بني قريظة. Don't pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. Now some of the Sahaba understood that to mean hurry up and get to Bani Qurayza before Asr. And other ones understood it to mean that if you should be on your way to Bani Qurayza and Asr comes in, wait until you get to Bani Qurayza. And so there were two groups of people that split on that understanding. They were literally in the same group, and half the group said we should pray Asr because it's in, and the other half said the Prophet ﷺ said don't pray Asr until you get to Bani Qurayza. And the Prophet ﷺ, this in usul, when you look at a text which is called a nas, nun sad, a nas is the actual ayah or the hadith. That's a text. And then you have, the nas can be sarih, where there's no ambiguity, or the nas can be zahir, where there's ambiguity but one opinion is more obvious than another. Or it could be mujmal, where it's just not clear. It could have more than one possible interpretation. Example of that is the word qur in Arabic. In the Quran it's used for menstruation, but it's from something called the al-dad, which means the opposites. And qur can mean the time of a woman's actual cycle, and it can mean the time she's free of blood. It can have both meanings. And the Imams differed on it, and there's no clear nas, sarih, about that ruling, and that's why the Malikis and the Hanafi and the Shafi'i differ in their understanding of that verse. So when these Sahaba, half of them prayed and the other half didn't. When they got to the Bani Qurayza, they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they told him what happened, and he didn't condemn either of them. And the ulama took from that is that they made an ijtihad, and both of their ijtihads were correct. And that's the point of ijtihad. And he was teaching them ijtihad. He was teaching them when you don't understand something, ijtihad means it's badal al-wasa' or badal al-juhd, لِيَصْلِ إِلَى النَّتِيجَة. It's to extend all of your energy in order to arrive at some result. So the mujtahid is somebody who exerts all of their understanding to arrive at a correct opinion about something. But ultimately it's opinion. And this is one of the things about Islam which is, I think, really refreshing, is that the overwhelming majority of rulings in Islam are not, they are not qat'i, which means absolute and from God. They're actually dhanni, which is probabilistic. In other words, we probably think that's what God meant, but we really don't know. And what that does is it leads to a type of humility, first and foremost. It also leads to a type of awareness of human limitation. And it also leads to an understanding that all understanding is filtered through the human mind. It doesn't matter who the person is. All understanding is filtered through the human mind. And Allah says, مَا قَدْرُ اللَّهِ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. They didn't estimate Allah or give Allah a due measure, because you can't measure the infinite. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Himself is that people do not give Him a correct due measure. And so the rulings in shari'ah are the overwhelming majority of what we call fiqh is actually, it is of human invention. I mean, that's just the truth. But it's based upon texts and principles that were given to us by Allah through His Messenger. So we say by Allah and His Messenger because Allah is shari' haqiqatan and the Prophet is shari' majazan. And that's the way the ulama put it. That Allah in reality is the lawgiver. There's no la hukma illa lillah, that there is no ruling except by Allah. But that means that there's no hukm with absolute certainty except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To say that human beings don't have judgment is to deny human experience and to deny also what happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, did the Prophet make ijtihad or not? That's a khilaf issue amongst the usuli scholars. But the Prophet ﷺ was corrected by Jibreel alayhi salam on more than one occasion. And so the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us. He also was caused to forget things in order for him to teach his community. He did things that were makruh in order for people to teach his community that they weren't haram. And when he does them, it's not considered makruh. So there are things in the hadith that are actually makruh, and yet the Prophet ﷺ did them. And how is that determined? And that is what the mujtahid does. And so if you look at the overwhelming majority of verses in the Quran that relate to ahkam or legal rulings, those ahkam are not what are called qat'i. There's qat'i and dhanni are the two words that the usuli scholars use. Qat'i means that it's absolute. So you have what's called qat'iyyat al-wurud and qat'iyyat al-dilala. Qat'iyyat al-wurud is, do we know with absolute certainty that the text is from God? And all of the Quran is considered qat'iyyat al-wurud. All of it. So anything in the Quran is considered qat'iyyat al-wurud. There's no doubt that it came from Allah. The majority of what's in the Quran is considered dhanniyatu dilala. In other words, what does the verse mean or indicate? The majority of the Quran is probabilistic. In other words, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that when you divorce a woman that you're supposed to do tarabbus or tarabbasu thalathat qura'in, to wait for 3 qura'. That is qat'iyyat al-wurud. We know that it's in the Quran and it's from Allah, there's no doubt. But the dilala of qura' is probabilistic, because it could either mean the actual time of menstruation or it can mean the time that a woman's free from blood. So what do? Well, that's where the khilaf comes. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said that it was the actual menstrual period. Aisha radiallahu anhu said it was the time between the menstrual period. And the fuqaha took different positions. And so there's an example where you have certainty that there is a ruling about the matter, but what exactly the ruling is, there's khilaf. And therefore, because it's a difference, you can't say one is right and the other's wrong, because it's ijtihad. And that's the whole point. And this idea that there's only one right way or something is just not true. And there are many examples of that in Sharia. Another example, the had punishment. Had punishment is a punishment that was particularly described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the only one that can give a had punishment, which is a punishment that relates to an action that somebody does. In Sharia, there are two types of punishments. There are the hudud, and then there's the ta'azir. The ta'zir is the punishment that a qadi decides from his own ijtihad. And according to the ulama, it should not exceed a had punishment. And there's some khilaf about how far you can go. 40 lashes, 80 lashes, because the had punishment of 80 lashes, within the Maliki school, they did exceed in certain cases. But the point being is that you have a had punishment which is specific. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for instance, as a had punishment of adultery, there's 100 lashes. If the person was not married, fornication. If the person was married, then the rajam was the punishment that came in the hadith. So what then do you do with homosexuality? Well, the ulama differed. According to the three imams, they considered that it was the same as fornication, and they actually put there was a death penalty. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu had a principle that he differs with the other imams in his usul methodology. And he would not take a had punishment with singular hadith that did not reach a level that was absolutely certain with him. And so he actually said that there is no had punishment for homosexuality, that the homosexuality should be punished by the ijtihad of a qadi. So it's ta'zir. So there's a difference. Now, for somebody, a modern person will come along and say, well, the hadith there, اقتل الفاعل والمفعول به, or something like that. And they'll say, well, there's the hadith. Well, the point is that Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu knew about the hadiths that were mentioned about fornication, but according to his methodology, they did not reach the criterion that he would use them. Another example is Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Ahmad ibn Hanbal will prefer a weak hadith over analogical reasoning, qiyas. He would actually prefer a weak hadith. If he found a weak hadith, he would take that as a ruling before he would use analogical reasoning. Well, the other three imams disagree with that. They say you can't use a weak hadith for a hukm shar'i. And so they all prefer qiyas because they consider qiyas to be stronger, because you're working with a sahih hadith and making qiyas, or an ayah and making analogical reasoning. So their methodologies differ. You also have differences in the Arabic language. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said in a hadith that came down from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, من أتبع ستة من شوال فكأنه صام الدهر كله, أو كما قال, whoever fasts 6 days from Shawwal, it's as if he fasted the whole year after Ramadan. Well, Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i differed on what that, and Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, they differed on what that min meant. Because min in the Arabic language can be a partitive, which is min li-tab'id. It can be min al-ibtida'. It can be min al-bayan. There's different types of min in the Arabic language. So for instance, in the Quran it says, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. Well, what does that min there mean? Does it mean ibtida'an min al-Quran, like ataytu min Makkata, I came from Mecca? Or does it mean a portion of the Quran, نُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرآن تَبْعِيضًا, like غُضُّ مِنْ أَبْصَارِكُم. What does that min there mean? Is it لِلْبَيَان? Is it لِلْتَبْعِيض? I mean, this is just min. So there's different, and sometimes the ulama differ what it means. So in that case, Imam Malik said that min is ibtida'an, is ibtida'an. It means min beginning in Shawwal, and so you could fast those 6 days anytime during the year before the next Ramadan, and you got your 6 days. Because he was saying min ash-Shawwal, yani ibtida'an min ash-Shawwal. Whoever fasts beginning with Shawwal until the next Ramadan. The other Imam said, no, that min is lit-tab'id. It has to be from Shawwal. In other words, it has to be part of Shawwal. And you can't say one is wrong and the other's right, because the Arabic grammar يحتمل الاثنين. In other words, both meanings are encompassed in, and that's the nature of language. Language can mean, there are many possibilities with language. Right? I mean, I can say, Omar came today. I can also say, Omar came today? And those are completely different meanings. But if I read those on a piece of paper, and then Hamza said, Omar came today, and I didn't have some type of adverb to indicate to you, questioningly, or shockingly, or whatever, to let you know. So in the hadith, we don't know sometimes how things were actually said. It's not always clarified, and things become ambiguous. And that's where you get the nature of trying to understand. That's what the imams are doing. They're trying to understand what exactly is being said here. And basically, many of them differed, and over a period of time, certain imams and the schools that they followed became accepted as canonical or authoritative by the ummah. Now, just to give you an example of Imam Malik, because a lot of people get very confused about certain things. Imam Malik considered it makruh to fast the first 6 days after the Eid in Shawwal. It's actually makruh in his madhab. Now people say, how could it be makruh when the hadith says, whoever fasts 6 days أتبع رمضان بستة من شوال, you follow Ramadan by 6 days from Shawwal, how could it be makruh? Imam Malik had a principle in his madhab that if he felt that people would think that something was a sunnah mu'akkada or a wajib, he would actually consider it makruh, because he had a principle of what was called makhafata i'tiqad al-wujub, out of fear that people will believe something is an obligation. Because if you believe something's an obligation, if it's a sunnah, it's a bid'ah. And so you actually become mubtadi'. And he feared for people's understanding in certain things because of ignorant people. So for instance, there is an opinion, it's a weaker opinion in the madhab of Imam Malik, but there's an opinion that he considered holding the hands in the prayer to be makruh because people would think it was an obligation of the prayer. And that certainly has happened. There are a lot of Muslims that think that if you don't hold your hands in the prayer, that it's like you've missed a fard of the prayer. And I've seen that very clearly. Well, if you believe that that is a fard in the prayer, you're mubtadi'. Because no imam in the history of Islam, as far as I know, has said that it's a fard. And there is an Iraqi Maliki imam who considered it haram to do it. So it's actually the onus from a Maliki perspective is stronger to leave your hands at your side than it is to hold them. Because they're saying there's a valid imam who actually considered it prohibited, whereas no imam has ever considered it an obligation. And the 4 imams all consider it to be from the hay'ah. They don't even consider it a sunnah. Not one of the 4 imams consider qabl to be a sunnah in the prayer. But there's a lot of people don't know that. They just assume because you do it every time, and everybody that I've ever seen pray has done that except the Shia and the Khawarij, right? And so it must be a bid'ah not to do that, right? But if you go to the early Islam, Imam Shafi'i said in the وَلَا بَأْسَ أَنْ يُرْسِلُهُمَا إِنْ لَمْ يَعْبَثْ بِهِمَا. It's perfectly acceptable for him to leave his hands at his side as long as he doesn't play with them when he prays. Imam Abdurrahman al-Awza'i considered it that they were both sunnah or acceptable. And Ibn Abd al-Barr in al-Kafi said جعل اليمنى على اليسرى أو إرسالهما كل ذلك من السنة. To hold your hands like that or to leave them at the side, all of that is from the practice of the Prophet ﷺ. And also Hassan al-Basri, I mean several of the scholars. So those are the issues that should never be issues. And the reason that they become issues is out of ignorance. And so a lot of what's happening with the present day situation is that Muslims are just really ignorant of their own tradition, and so we've fallen into these things. And people that aren't capable, I mean, somebody came to me and said, brother, you know, you shouldn't tell people to follow madhab. And then I said, well, I mean, that's what I was taught, that you should follow madhab. And he said, no, you should tell them to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. And then, first of all, that's called ta'an fi a'immatina. I mean, it's saying that Abu Hanifa didn't follow the Quran and the Sunnah, that Imam Malik didn't follow the Quran and Sunnah. I mean, it's basically saying that these people weren't following the Quran and Sunnah. And then it becomes, well, no, they were, but they weren't always right. And I accept that. That's why Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu is corrected many times by his students, Shaybani and Abu Yusuf. I mean, they actually correct, they don't agree with their teacher. There's Malikis that don't agree with Imam Malik from his students. And then you have all these centuries of scholars going over and looking at the dalils again and again and doing it. So you're not talking about an individual. When you say Maliki or Shafi'i or Hanafi, it's a school. That's what people don't understand. It's a school of a large group of scholars, that what they're all accepting is the methodology of the school. That's the difference. And the methodologies differ. So for instance, the methodology of Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu is that he will not take solitary transmissions over a principle in his madhab. And that's why even if a hadith is sahih, he will leave it when it's overridden by a principle with him. And that's why there is a hadith that says a non-Muslim is not killed a Muslim is not killed for a non-Muslim. If a Muslim kills a non-Muslim, he's not killed for it. He can be punished, he can pay the diya, but he's not actually killed for it. There's a hadith that says that, and that's the position of Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i. Abu Hanifa said that goes against the Quranic principle of musawat and dam. And he said, I'm not going to take a solitary transmission that goes against a principle. So he considered that if a Muslim killed a non-Muslim, and he did it unjustly, that he was killed for that. And that's and you can't say that's wrong and the other ones are right because the hadith says that. No, he knew the hadith. But he did not accept a solitary transmission in that case. And there are many examples of that. Another thing is Imam Malik radiallahu anhu considered the actions of the people of Medina, the scholars of Medina, who were tabi'een. He had 900 shuyukh, Imam Malik. He studied with 900 teachers. 600 of them were tabi'een. He considered, and these are people that met the Sahaba. One of his closest teachers was somebody who spent decades with Ibn Umar. And we know that Abdullah ibn Umar was one of the most rigorous in following or adhering to the Sunnah of the Prophet. Well, Imam Malik took directly from Nafi', who was the servant of Ibn Umar. He actually served him. So Imam Malik radiallahu anhu considered that the actions of the people of Medina, if they agreed on something, because he was living with people that lived with Sahaba, thousands of people, he considered if they agreed on something, that would override a sound hadith. So Imam Malik, for instance, there is a hadith that says that the Prophet, it's in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet, Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam an siyam yawm al-jumu'ah. The Prophet prohibited fasting on Friday. Imam Malik said, I saw all of the virtuous men of the city fasting on Friday. And I'm not going to take a solitary transmission of a hadith that one man narrates and leave what I'm seeing hundreds of scholars in this city doing who lived with the Sahaba, and they were doing that practice when the Sahaba were alive, and the Sahaba didn't tell them, don't fast on Friday. So Imam Malik considered Friday a virtuous day to fast. Not because he didn't know the hadith, and that's why somebody said, Ya akhi, al-hadith. And Imam Malik said, كُلُّ قَوْلٍ يُؤْخَذُ مِنْهُ وَيُرَدْ إِلَّا قَوْلُ صَاحِبِ الْمَقَامِ. Every word is taken from and left except the word of this Prophet. Imam Malik knew, he said that. He's the one that said that. And yet, he leaves many, many hadiths. Imam Malik, Ibn al-Qasim said that, Ibn Wahbin, radiallahu anhu, said that had it not been for Malik, I would have been destroyed, because I memorized so many hadith until I became confused. And then he said, and then I went to Malik, and I would tell him the hadith, and he said, لَيْسَ الْعَمَلَ عَلَى هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ. That hadith is not, there's no practice in that hadith. And he'd say, خُذْ هَذَا حَدِيث, دَعْ هَذَا حَدِيث. And he would tell him. And Ibn al-Qasim, radiallahu anhu, when he went into the house of Malik, he found stacks of hadith that Malik never related. And he said, Rahimukallah, this was after Imam Malik died, he said, Rahimukallah, Aba Abdillah, Aradta Allah bi'ilmika, you wanted Allah with your knowledge. Because Imam Malik was somebody once came to him and said, recite this hadith to me. And he said, I don't recite that hadith. And the man said, Ibn Uyayna recites it. There's another muhaddith at Malik's time. And Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said that it's enough to consider a man insane that relates everything he hears. And he wasn't speaking about Ibn Uyayna, he was speaking about himself. That he related hadith according to what he felt the action was on. And sometimes he related hadith to show that he knew the hadith but still didn't practice it. So people couldn't say, oh, he must not have known the hadith. So he actually relates hadith that he didn't consider the action to be in accordance with. And so Imam Malik was very focused on action, and he would leave solitary transmissions. And what I mean by solitary, in the hadith methodology, the hadiths are broadly divided into two categories, mutawatir and ahad. Mutawatir is a hadith that there's a difference of opinion of how many is needed, but generally 10 is the number. Some go as far as 50. But what it means is that in every generation there are at least 10 separate chains of transmission. So there had to be 10 Sahaba, there had to be 10 Tabi'een, and so usually they go exponential. If there's 10 Sahaba, there'll be hundreds of Tabi'een that relate it. That's usually the way it works. But the point of the Mutawatir is they say that those 10 Sahaba could not have come together and said, let's fabricate a hadith together. Because all of the Sahaba are considered udul. So maybe we could say that maybe one Sahabi fabricated a hadith or thought the Prophet ﷺ said something. I mean, even just iftiradan, we could say that, just theoretically. Maybe one Sahabi did do that. But 10 Sahaba who are known to be just and upright and had belief in Allah and His Messenger and knew that the Prophet said in a mutawatir hadith that over 50 Sahaba relate, whoever says a hadith that's fabricated and claims that I said it, let him take his seat in the hellfire. That hadith is mutawatir. So all the Sahaba knew that hadith. So you cannot say that 10 Sahaba are going to risk going to hell by fabricating a hadith. So that's considered a mutawatir hadith. That hadith is very strong. But I'll give you an example of a mutawatir hadith. In the prayer, there's a tawatur that the Prophet ﷺ in each, when he would come out of ruku', he would do the raf' al-yadayn. Right? Now that is related, and Imam Malik radiallahu anhu actually relates that. In Imam Malik's madhab, he didn't raise his hands because the amal of the people of Medina was not in accordance with that. The Ibn Abd al-Barr, who actually preferred the position of raising the hands, he actually considered that to be a stronger position. Ibn Abd al-Barr radiallahu anhu was asked by somebody, why don't you raise your hands in prayer? Because you consider it to be a stronger position. And he said, لا أريد أن أخالف أصحابي في أمر فيه سعة. I don't want to go against my peers, meaning the other Maliki ulama, in a matter that has sa'a. It's not really, it's not he didn't consider it important enough for him, because it's from hay'at al-salah. It's not like a sunnah, it's from the hay'ah. In other words, it's if you left it, you don't have to do sahu, something like that. It doesn't have the strength of that. So he just felt that it was better to not go against the majority of people in that matter. And that was his position. So somebody asked, what's the problem of looking through the opinions of all the schools and choosing the soundest of them? Well, I think that was my whole point, is that they all have their validities from their perspectives. Do you see? I mean, they have different perspectives, and then it becomes whose usul is the best. And that's just not, the Ummah has said all of them are of equal stature in that matter. All of them are of equal stature. That doesn't mean, like for instance, in the old Shafi'i madhab, you know, the Shafi'i ulama said that you couldn't pray flying. And this has to do with flying carpets and things, because he used to talk about there were awliya that flew around on carpets and things like that. And could they fly on those carpets? And the Maliki ulama said they could. And their proof was that the air was a jirm. It was actually substantial and had matter. The Shafi'i ulama said it didn't. That this is just faragh, it's emptiness. So in that case, I mean, obviously they were wrong on that matter. I mean, that's just been proven. Now that's qat'i. I mean, the idea of oxygen being a jirm is qat'i. And if you deny that, you're denying something that's no, I mean, it's not like you're going to hell for denying that, you know, that's not the case. But that's something that's ma'loom. I mean, it's just known. And it can be proven as well, empirically. So you get cases like that, there's no doubt about that. In terms of what's called talfiq, which is to choose different positions, the ulama are in agreement that you can do different madhabs, as long as you don't do what's called tatabbu' al-rukhas, which is to go easy way from madhabs. Now obviously you can do rukhsa from another madhab for darura, when it's a necessity. Right? I mean, nobody denies that. But when it's not a necessity, then you can't do it. And the darurat, you know, the rukhsa of a darura tuqaddiru biqadriha, you do only what you need to do based on the need. So for instance, in Maliki madhab, touching a woman doesn't break your wudu if there's no shahwa or no shahwa was intended. Those are conditions. In Shafi'i madhab, it breaks your wudu for a woman to touch a man or a man to touch a woman. I mean, both ways. I'm just saying to touch a woman because I'm a man, but for both, it goes both ways. So on Hajj, for doing tawaf, it's obviously because wudu is a condition of the validity of your tawaf. So if you are a Shafi'i making Hajj, it's impossible literally it's impossible not to touch the opposite sex, unless it was a karama. I mean, it could be a miracle or something like that. But I mean, generally it would be considered basically impossible during those days. So in that case, they go with the rukhsa of either one of their ulama in their own school that didn't consider it, because I don't know if they have, or they go with the Maliki madhab, whatever. Because most of the schools have within their own system opinions that confer with the other imams. Like there are Maliki ulama that differ from other Maliki ulama, and they'll confer in that with the Shafi'is or with the Hanafis. But it's still considered a Maliki position because it was the Maliki alim that put it forward. So there's a lot of examples like that. Yeah, the had punishment. The had punishment is, I mean, those go under ahkam al-sultaniyah, and they don't apply to us. They apply to rulers, and rulers have to enforce them. And the had punishments, you're supposed to avoid them. Idru al-hudud bi-shubuhat, always try to not apply the hudud if there's any doubtful matters. That applies to the government. In terms of common people, it's preferable that you don't take things to the government. Once you take it to the government, then you have to. And so traditionally, sitr is what's the preferred situation. So for instance, you know, if somebody fornicates, I mean, the best thing to do is to hide it and not tell anybody. I mean, if somebody did that, if that was their ibtila, then they should hide it and not tell anybody. And traditionally in the Muslim world, I mean, they would keep, you know, a family would keep their daughter inside a house until she had the baby and just not tell anybody, things like that. I mean, that was the practice of Muslims. I mean, it's not like you want people to get killed and things like that. Most of the, you know, traditionally in the, and also you need 4 witnesses, which is, it's impossible. You're just not going to get, unless somebody was just completely profligate and was doing something in public. But other than that, you just wouldn't get a situation where you would see that. And that's almost called what they call in Western law legal fiction. I mean, it's almost impossible to do that. And in those cases, those witnesses, you know, if there were 4 just witnesses that saw penetration, I mean, that will establish a had punishment. But it's done through the shari'ah. And obviously, I mean, one of them could just not want to testify. You don't have to testify against people unless a qadi actually calls you or something like that and forces you to do that. But generally, I mean, the idea is to veil people and not say, if you see somebody drinking, you don't go tell people that you saw so-and-so drinking. So, I mean, that's a position. I mean, the hudud are not, traditionally they weren't applied very often in the Muslim world because people didn't ever take it to that point where they were applied. And so, I mean, what Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayy says is that if you look at the hudud, they're really deterrents. And that's what they are. At root, they're deterrents. They're attempts at making people realize the gravity of things. Because, I mean, if you know that rajam is the punishment for adultery, that should let you know that this is a very grave matter, and indeed it is. And one of the things about the woman in Nigeria, which, I mean, I consider it's just crazy to try to apply the had punishments when you don't have an Islamic society. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu did not apply had punishment during the famine for stealing because the shubuhat were too great. You know, when people are hungry, they'll steal, when in normal situation they wouldn't steal. They might have children, you know, their family might be starving, so they'll go out and steal. And so he did not apply the had punishment during that period for that reason. Well, in a society where you have 70% unemployment, I mean, we'd have to consider that, you know, applying the idea of cutting people's hands off for theft in a society, or in communities where unemployment is 70% or 50%, right? So all those things would be taken into consideration by a qadi and by a society. So and then even like in the case of iqrar, according to the Maliki madhab, if a woman comes to the qadi and confesses fornication, he's supposed to try to get her out of it. I mean, that's what the books of fiqh say. He's supposed to say things like, maybe you were asleep and somebody came into your bed, or maybe لعلك كنت غافلة, or something. You know, they try to ask things. And also, traditionally, the fuqaha said about a woman who got pregnant, because in Malik's madhab, zina yathbut bil-hamal, that zina can be confirmed by pregnancy, whereas in Ahmad ibn Hanbal's madhab is a different ruling. And a woman could have claimed that she was in a bathhouse and she used a towel that a man had used, or she went swimming and was inseminated through that. I mean, that's literally written in the text about that. Even if you look at mula'ana, which is the where you swear that the person's a liar, and then you call the curse of Allah is called on the person who's claiming that his wife slept with somebody. And the reason in shari'ah, if a man finds his wife with another man, the reason that it's permissible for him to go and claim that is because of wiratha, of inheritance, and nasab. Because she could get pregnant, and then this is being called his son, and it's not his son. And so that's an injustice to him. So in that case, it's permissible for him to go to the qadi and accuse her of that. But if he does, she's permitted, if he's lying, she's permitted to refute that. And she calls, if you look at the ayah, she doesn't call the ghadab, the la'n of Allah on her, which is damnation. Is bu'd an rahmatillah, is that Allah remove her from His mercy. She calls the wrath of Allah on him, which is less than the la'n. So even you can see the mercy in that, because a woman might lie in that situation, just out of shame. I mean, there's people that would have so much shame in that they would lie. So even there's a mercy in that the word used is different. And then also the fact that that if she does refute him, that they're divorced and there's no had punishment. So even though the child does not go to the father if she did get pregnant, her life is preserved for that. And even with, I mean, the rajam during the time of the Prophet was done by, it was all done by confession. The 4 people, and there was the one man who his son had been working with a woman, and that was found out. But other than that, there's one man that came to the Prophet ﷺ and admitted that he committed fornication, and he was punished for it. But when he accused this woman, when they brought the woman, she said, "Kadaba wallahi," he's telling a lie by Allah. He got not only the 100 lashes, he got 80 lashes for qadhaf, for claiming that she had committed adultery, fornication with him. So the Prophet didn't punish the girl, but the man was punished twice. And Allahu alam, I mean, you should believe somebody if they swear by Allah, but you know, that's the situation. So you can see in the Sharia, I mean, the whole thing is mercy. But I mean, the basic thing about this is, and I mean, this is the bottom line here, is that this modern thing of picking and choosing, and I mean, the word in Greek for heresy means to choose for yourself. I mean, that's what a heresy is. It's when you kind of choose for yourself, because it's an incredible state of arrogance to just assume that you actually know anything to choose for yourself. And so the bottom line is that that you should adhere in your ibadat, you should adhere to the best of your ability to one school. I mean, that's what our ulama have taught. And in terms of the mu'amalat, I would say particularly in this time that there has to be flexibility for Muslims. I mean, it's as simple as that. There just has to be flexibility. And that's the job of ulama, to do that in terms of financial transaction. Because there's just a lot of things now. I mean, there's transactions that never existed before. There's financial situations that have never existed before, and things like that. And so there's no doubt that you have to have some, and also in the had punishments, like the United Arab Emirates is Maliki in their general rulings, but in their had punishment they go to the most compassionate of the opinions of the imams when they actually use any penal punishments. So on Malik's ruling about dogs, his proof is that there was no indication that they were najis. And in terms of the hadith about إذا ولغ كلب في إناء فاغسلوه 7 مرات, if a dog licks in a bowl, wash it 7 times. I mean, Imam Malik said that that's a proof that it's not najasa. Because he said, had it been because of najasa, the Prophet would not have specified 7 times. And the fact, because najasa tuzaru bi izalati, it's just whatever removes the najasa. But the fact that he said 7 times, Imam Malik said, that indicates that it's ta'abbud, that there's not a illah. Because in usul, there's two reasons why there's a hukm. One reason is what's called ta'abbud, which is that there is no apparent reason. It's just for devotional practice. The other is, and that means there is a illah, but it's makhfiyah, it's hidden. The legal rationale for it is hidden from us. When you know the illah, and the reason that you wash najasa is li'izalatihi, it's to remove it. So whatever removes it is enough. So if you can remove the najasa with 1 wash, you've fulfilled the purpose of it, and that's all you need. Whereas the fact that it was mentioned 7 times, he said, indicates that it's lita'abbud, it's not li'illat najasa. So he knew the hadith, and that's how he interpreted it. And it's a strong hadith. And his other proof was the fact that he said you can hunt with dogs, and if we know that if najasa contaminates food, you have to throw the food away. So he said if a dog goes and bites a rabbit, and then the rabbit's been contaminated with the najasa of the dog, but the fact that you can eat it, he said, means that's not the illah. It's not because of najasa. That was his opinion. That doesn't mean the other ones are invalid, but you have to recognize the strength of that position. It's a strong position. And you can't say that Imam Shafi'i was wrong or Imam Malik was wrong. From our perspective, they're both right. Now, this gets into an usuli concept of what's called taqtiyya and tasweeb. The usuli scholars broke into 2 different categories. One group are called musawwiba, who consider all of the imams right, and the other group are the mukhatti'ah, who say only one of them is right, or there's only one right opinion. So 3 of them might have followed that opinion and 1 differed. Or it could be the 1 was right and the other 3 were wrong. But they say, but there's deferment to the akhirah. In other words, because it's ijtihad, we can't determine qat'iyan by any absolute, in any absolute way, whether or not that was sound. So the point of it is that, and Imam al-Sha'rani, who wrote a book called Al-Mizan, which is about the differences between the 4 imams, he considered them all to be right. And he considered it to be a type of balance, that Allah had used these 4 imams and their opinions to balance each other in what he called the mizan of tashdid and tarkhis, of when things are difficult and when things are easy. So he said the imams, whenever they disagree, it has to do with difficulty and ease, basically. And the reason that one will be easy is because that rukhsa becomes a valid position when you need. So for instance, in the wudu, Imam Shafi'i went with the shidda, Imam Malik went with the rukhsa. On Hajj, you want to go with Imam Malik's position. And so it becomes that they're both right, but they're going whether it's with azaim or rukhas. like that. That's all. And so they end up, what happens is because, and he shows how they're, interestingly enough, they're not all, they're easy, sometimes they're hard, other times. So the madhab ends up being completely balanced. So none of the madhabs are difficult in and of themselves because the imams differ. So there's this type of balance. It's an amazing book because he literally shows how it's really a miracle. He considers it a miracle, the positions that they took on these different rulings. It's a very powerful book. And he says that it's an opening that Allah gave him that he had never given any scholar before him. And he allowed him to see something about the secret of the shari'ah that nobody had seen before him. And that's the last book studied in fiqh in Mauritania. That's the one that once somebody's mastered the Maliki madhab, then they study that book. It's the last book they study. Which gives you a respect for the other imams, because it's really dangerous to be entrenched in your position and think that your imam's superior to the other imams. I mean, the ulama say that it's permissible to consider what's called tarjih, that you prefer that school, but the idea that one's less than the other that's a mistake. And finally, the Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu is al-Imam al-Azam. I mean, Allah gave him a maqam in which he took 80% of the ummahs. I mean, 80% of the followers of this ummah have been Hanafi. So, I mean, that's in itself just a testimony to what Allah gave him. And he is a Ajami too. He's not an Arab. And the Ajam represent, right, about 80% of the Ummah, don't they? Almost. More. The Arabs are about, what, 10%? Mashallah. So, but they're all ala huda and they're all guided. Anything else?
There were a couple of questions here about just which madhab to choose in this time of being intensive.
So there's times when you have to give people rukhsa, and Ibn Uyayna radiallahu anhu, he said, "At-tashdid yahsinuhu kullu ahad." Everybody's capable of being hard. وَلَكِنَ الْفِقْهُ رُخْصَةٌ عَنْ ثِقَةٍ. But real fiqh is finding facilitations for people from trustworthy sources. Everybody can be hard. It's easy to say haram. But finding, which is not, there is mashaqqa in the deen, and it's not trying to always find the easy way. And the Prophet ﷺ, خُيَّرَ بَيْنَ أَمْرَيْنَ إِلَى اخْتَرَ أَيْسَرَهُمَا. The Prophet ﷺ was never given a choice between two things, except he took the easiest way. That doesn't mean in fara'id and things like that. I mean, that has to do with, if you have a choice between this or that, don't make things hard on yourself just to make things hard. There are people that like to do that. They just like to make things hard on themselves. And so, if you can walk or ride during the Hajj, there are people that will walk just to make it hard on themselves. Whereas there's no reward, extra reward in walking on the Hajj. I mean, if you ride, in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, he rode his camel during the Hajj. He even made tawaf on his camel. So, I mean, those kind of... he did the tawaf, but he went around the Kaaba with the camel, checking people and things. Mm-hmm. Because they had principles in their madhab that they considered higher than singular narration. See, when you have singular narrations, the probability of error increases. So, for instance, Imam Malik, there's a hadith about the qullatayn, about the khabath, right? لا يحمل الخبث. إذا بلغ الماء قلتين. And in the Shafi'i madhab, the Shafi'i madhab, they take that, right? Imam Malik didn't take that because the Rawi, the Sahabi that narrated that, was not from the fuqaha of the Sahaba. And he considered it that if, as long as the water has not changed in one of the three, for Imam Shafi'i it had to get to a certain level before you'd consider it pure. Whereas Imam Malik, he said no, as long as the three basic things didn't change. So he knew the hadith, but he didn't take it because of a illah in the hadith. And that science is a very difficult science in hadith, of determining why hadiths are taken or not. So a hadith can be sound, but it can have weaknesses that you don't recognize because you're not at the level of recognizing. Whereas Imam Malik, he preferred the position of the people of Medina because that was an ahad hadith, and the man that related, there are two men that related, neither of them were considered to be among the fuqaha of the Sahaba. Do you see? So he would actually look at the rawi, the hal of the rawi, and there are many examples like that. And so Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu had a principle of not taking, he would need two sound hadiths. Isn't that correct, Imam Jamal? He wanted two sound hadiths to override a principle, right? Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. Yeah. So he wanted something had to be of the same level. So the only thing that, if you have a Quranic principle, the only thing that's going to override a Quranic principle is a mutawatir hadith amongst the usulis. Because a mutawatir hadith has the same level as the Quran in its strength. And then you have what's called mutlaq, muqayyad, and am and khas. You have, in usul, there are hadiths that are mutlaq, which means they are applicable. And then you have a hadith that are only applicable to specific situations. So for instance, there's a hadith about the, khams mushbi'at in the radha'a, which Imam Shafi'i took. So you needed to have a child would have to suck 5 times, and they would be enough that the child didn't want the breast anymore. Imam Malik didn't take that. He said that al-massa al-wahida is enough. And that was the practice of the people. So there are many examples like that, of the hadith. And it's not rejecting the hadith. I mean, you can't see it as they're rejecting something the Prophet ﷺ said, hashahum. They would never reject anything the Prophet. Don't think that they're rejecting the Prophet's hadith. But what they're saying is that the hadith is not strong enough for them to leave another proof that they have, even though the proof might not be a hadith.
Is it kind of like looking at it as this is parallel to something that's said that it's not actually a given?
Well, no. That the probability of error, or the probability, for Imam Malik, what he's saying is the practice that the majority of scholars in Medina are doing, they're doing it because that's what they found the Sahaba doing. The Sahaba would not have been doing it had it not been accepted practice, because too many of them are doing it. So if he has a hadith in which maybe 2 or 3 Sahabi relate it, he's not going to leave the practice for an isolated hadith, because he considers that practice to be a stronger proof of what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching. So he's seeing that as a hadith. The amal of Ahl al-Madinah has more force than an ahad hadith. Alright, that's what it is. And now, when Imam Shafi'i said, إِذَا صَحَ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي, that's true. If the hadith is sound, that's my madhab. But that's within the context of his usul. Abu Hanifa would agree, but the hadith has to have the strength that he has stipulated before he's going to leave a Quranic principle. Do you see? I mean, it's a difference in usul. It's not a difference in basic understanding. The Prophet, whatever he says, ala al-ayn wa ra's. But when we have what's called ta'arud al-adillah, you know, when proofs are, when you have different understandings, or you have two hadiths that say the opposite things, they might have the same rutbah of sahha, the same rank of soundness. The faqih is going to look and determine what other factors are involved here. The first thing he tries to do is make a tawafuq. He tries to find some way of making them agree with each other. So this one's mutlaq, this one's muqayyad. You know, in this hadith it was speaking about a general thing, but here it's a specific circumstance. So he might try to find that. Or he might say, this is abrogated, because the Prophet ﷺ said this in the 2nd year of Hijrah, and this one's, he said, in the 7th year of Hijrah, and so this abrogates that. That's what he's going to be looking at. He's going to be looking at that. And the same is true with the linguistic aspect of it, of interpreting it from language, you know. And I was telling you about that man who said to me, you should be following the Quran and Sunnah. And so I just said to him, look, first of all, the only way you know the Quran is from the Rijal. I don't care what you tell me, the only way that you know that Allah said something is because the Quran is mutawatir, transmitted by men and women. That's the only way we know the Quran. And so if I'm ignorant and some person comes up to me and makes up a verse and says it's in the Quran, and he speaks very eloquent Arabic and I don't speak Arabic, how do I know that's not in the Quran? I'm not a hafiz, I don't understand Arabic, and this and that. He can just lead me astray, right? So the way we know the Quran is because of the mutawatir transmission of the Quran. The hadith, the only way we know the hadith is through men like Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Abu Hanifa. That's the only way that we know the hadith is men like that. And so then it becomes, you know, who do you follow? I mean, that's basically it. Do you follow your opinion? Do you follow, with all due respect, do you follow the opinion of Shaykh so-and-so living in the 20th or the 21st century or the 15th century Hijrah, and leave the opinion of, you know, 1,000 of the greatest scholars of the Ummah? I mean, seriously, that's the question. Are you going to follow? I mean, okay, I could write a book, the prayer of the Prophet as if you see it. Right? And Hamza Yusuf, I've got all 9 collections in my library, and I go through all the hadiths that are in the Sahih, and I try to work out how did the Prophet ﷺ pray. And so I write my little book, and then I put it out, and then there's people who happen to like me. And they'll say, oh, that's Hamza's book on how the Prophet prayed. And then they read it, and then they start praying like that. Now, does that make sense to do that? Or to pray, how did Abu Hanifa learn his prayer? Abu Hanifa actually met Sahaba. He met hundreds of ulama from the Tabi'een. And they met thousands of Sahaba. They saw them pray. I mean, I prayed with Murabb al-Hajj for a year, and I can tell you exactly how he prays, literally to every single detail. I can tell you exactly how he moves his forefinger because I watched. I can tell you exactly how he makes wudu because I wanted to see how he did it. Right? Now, you don't think Imam Malik, who's living in Medina with people who lived and served the Sahaba, he's not looking at how they prayed? I mean, so you're looking at somebody who saw Ibn Omar pray and served him for 20 years, and he's your teacher. And you're going to tell me that it's a prayer of somebody writing 1,400 years later from books. And he's going to show you how the Prophet ﷺ prayed. Seriously, think about that. I mean, he's going to show you how the Prophet, when those people saw people praying who saw the Prophet ﷺ pray. And the Prophet, what did he say? Sallu kama ra'aytumuni. Right. That's only a theoretical state. In usul, there's no hadith that override the Quran. But theoretically in usul, a mutawatir hadith is the same as the Quran. And therefore a mutawatir hadith, if you have an ayah in the Quran that is general, a mutawatir hadith can specify it. And if you have an ayah in the Quran that's specific, a mutawatir hadith can generalize. Because the Quran is the first category. Al-Quran, thumma sunnah, thumma al-qiyas, thumma al-ijma', thumma al-qiyas. I mean, that's the way it works. The Quran is the first level. And then the sunnah. Although the mutawatir of the sunnah is considered to be as authoritative as the Quran, because they're both mutawatir. Yeah, that's all. So it's more a theoretical than actually in application. It's just what the usuli scholars have identified. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that it's best to adhere to the Sunnah
Right.
schools of thought and methodology. I was wondering if there are others and on what basis they reject it.
The what?
The schools of thought.
The other schools? Well, I mean, the way that the ulama, and this gets to a crucial issue, which is about the idea of isnad. The ulama say that once a chain is broken, you can't reconnect it. And so, for instance, the last valid madhab, although the Azharis, in the 50s recognized the Ja'fari madhab as a canonical madhab. I mean, that's not a traditional Sunni position, but it's kind of a modern position. But the last madhab to be accepted was the madhab of Abu Dawud al-Zahiri, and that died out in the 9th century. And even though his books are still around, and they actually have a complete madhab, because the chain of transmission is broken. In other words, see, for instance, when you study in a chain, you're studying with ulama that studied with ulama that studied with ulama back to the original authors of the text. And so they knew their intentions, and that's part of what the udul are. The people, إنما يحمل هذا الدين من كل قرن عدوله. The people that carry this deen in every generation are the people of adala, the upright people. And the ulama who have that distinction, some of whom we've been fortunate to study with. I mean, I'm not at that level by any means. But the people that are at that level, who do still exist, I mean, they do carry the deen with dabt and adala, and so they're what are called thiqats. So, for instance, people that have mastered the Maliki madhab or the Hanafi madhab, they've mastered it, and they know there are things in the books like Mukhtasar Khalil, which is an intermediate text in Maliki fiqh. And by intermediate, I just mean that it's the beginning of advanced studies to do the Mukhtasar. The Ummahat are the advanced studies, even though the Mukhtasar in some ways is more difficult than the Ummahat. But in the Mukhtasar of Sidi Khalil, it's considered to be the mashhur of the madhab, the dominant opinion of the Maliki madhab. And yet, within it, there are things that the madhab does not agree with. Those are pointed out to you as you study with a qualified teacher to study. Like in the text of al-Akhdari, he mentions that wudu, that man salla bi ghayri wudu'in faqad kafar. Anyone that prays without wudu has entered into a state of apostasy. Now that's in al-Akhdari, which is a sound text of the Maliki madhab, but that's not the dominant opinion of the Maliki madhab. And that needs to be pointed out by a valid teacher. So you will find things in texts that if you don't have the transmission, then you don't have the madhab. And that's why once those chains of transmission break, that you can't really say, I'm going to become a Zahiri, because the Zahiri madhab went into extinction. And for a reason, for a hikmah. I mean, Allah put an end to it. So to try to revive it now, you don't really have any authority, because you don't have the chains of transmission. And the Senate is the secret of this ummah. The chain is the secret. What last question? Go ahead.
Right, for example, in Malik and Abu Hanifa, they have hadiths which they didn't take. Many times people come up with the argument, for example, Abu Hanifa, since he was in Iraq, he did not have a hadith, it never reached him.
Right. Well, the Imam, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya said in a series of lectures that he gave in California, he said it's our belief that the Imams knew all of the hadiths that relate to the ahkam. And there's only about 500 of them that actually deal with ahkam. There's not that many hadiths. And these men spent their entire lives. Imam Malik lived 92 years. And he was giving fatwa at the age of 17 in Medina. And he was living at a time when everybody went to Medina during their Hajj. So the idea that, I mean, here's a man who memorized over 100,000 hadith. And Imam Malik would only memorize sound hadith, even though he had literally hundreds of thousands of hadith in his personal collection. So the idea that they didn't know those 500 basic hadiths of ahkam is just a total absurdity. It really is. Even though Imam Malik, out of modesty, did say, although Qadi Iyad challenges the narration, he did say, when he was asked by Abu Mansur to make the Muwatta the official book of the entire ummah, like the Quran, it would be the hadith book, and he said, no, the Sahaba spread out and took with them knowledges that might not have come to us. So he was leaving that possibility open, and that possibility is there. There might be some hadiths that they didn't know. But the overwhelming majority, they certainly did. And their scholars who came after them did make those corrections and redresses. I mean, by the time the great scholars of the madhabs were working, and I'm talking about in the Shafi'i madhab, Imam Nawawi, who kind of finishes off the madhab in terms of just making a complete statement of the madhab. Imam Nawawi, to say that he didn't know all of the hadiths in ahkam is a total, it's just a lie. I mean, he knew all of the hadiths related to ahkam. And certainly Ibn Abdul Barr in the Maliki madhab knew all of the hadiths. He memorized over 100,000 by rote, and he knew all of the hadiths of ahkam. And by that time, al-Bukhari, all the great collections had been done. By the time people like Qadi Iyad and Ibn Abdul Barr, they were the transmitters of those collections. So the idea that they didn't know the hadiths, I mean, that's just, these are really these modern red herrings that are put out by people that are just dissembling. I don't think they're doing it wittingly, and don't get me wrong. I think a lot of these people are very sincere, but they really don't know the tradition. I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose, but they are ignorant, and their arguments are very superficial arguments. I mean, that's in reading them and looking at them myself. I mean, there's one argument that's always brought up that they say, وَأَحْمَدْ بن حنبل قال من قلة علم المرء أن يقلد غيره في دينه. From the lack of knowledge that a man has in this religion is that he imitates others in his religion. And they use that as this kind of attack on taqleed, and yet that is the very proof of taqleed. And that's what's so strange to me, that you can't see that is exactly why you are muqallid, because you don't have any knowledge. So to use that as a proof for not making taqleed is to basically be telling us that you're an alim. And this man who told me to follow the book and the Sunnah, I asked him one thing. I said, tell me one thing. When Allah says, هِيَ حَتَّى مَطْرَعِ الْفَجْرِ, about Laylat al-Qadr, what kind of hatta is that? You know, and he just looked at me with a blank stare. And I said, because does that include Fajr, or is it up to but not including Fajr? Because there's two types of hatta in that situation. There's actually 17 types of hatta in Arabic. But in that situation, there's two types. You can say, أكلت السمكة حتى رأسها, or أكلت السمكة حتى رأسها. And based on what that hatta, is that a hatta in which what follows it is mansub, or is that a hatta in which what follows it is majroor, and it's going to change the meaning? So you tell me. If you know that it's majroor, tell me what it means. Is it hiya hatta matra'i al-fajr, including fajr, or up until but not including fajr? And he couldn't answer that question. I said, that's one harf in the Quran, and you can't tell me what it means. So why should I trust that you can understand what hadith means? I mean, the fa in the Arabic language. There's a lot of types of fa in the Arabic language. I mean, is it like when the Quran says, فَعِظُوهُمْ وَهَجُرُوهُمْ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُمْ, right? You tell me what the fa is there, and then what are those wows? Is it wow and nisq? Is it wow for hel al-wal yufidu tartib? I mean, you know, these are things that these people don't know. So why should I follow the Quran and the Sunnah directly, and I don't know what the Quran and the Sunnah is actually saying? Because I don't know Arabic, and I don't know Arabic. I don't know Arabic at the level of a person who's capable of doing ijtihad. I mean, I can read books and I understand. I've studied grammar, but I don't know. If you ask me how many types of hatta, I know there's 17 because I've seen what Ibn Hisham in Mughni al-Labib says. There's 17 types of hatta. If you ask me now to enumerate them, I can't do it. I could give you maybe 4 or 5 different types of hatta in the Arabic language, but all 17, I can't enumerate them. But if my Shaykh was here, Abdullah Wad Ahmedna, he could tell you all 17. And Murab al-Hajj could, you know, that's like Fatiha for him. It's not,